being recorded.
Right, hopefully you can see my slides up. Is that right? Can everyone see my slides? Could somebody just confirm that they can see the slides
Yep.
okay? Is that
Slides
right?
are
Yep.
fine. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Right, so first of all, I guess I'll just introduce myself. I'm Emily Poole. I'm an independent financial planner with Perceptive Financial Solutions in Ampthill. And I have discovered this area of ethical and sustainable investing over the last few years. And, you know, it's really given me a massive sense of purpose to know that not only am I able to help people with their pensions and investments, but I can actually help them reconnect with their values and help them help their pensions and their investments reflect their values as well. I'm always saying to my clients that a pension is not just a savings vehicle for your retirement, but it's also a pot of money that is invested in companies that are doing all sorts of things in the world. And you really should be looking at what your pension's invested in, or your investment ISA, what it's invested in order to check that the things that the companies are doing that you're invested in, that you're happy with. And if you're not, that's when you ought to be thinking about making changes. So sustainable ethical investing is what I'm going to be talking about. There's a little bit of regulatory stuff here. Obviously, this is not any personal investment advice. This is a presentation for educational purposes. If you've got any questions, do ask, but I will not be able to give you any personal investment advice on this webinar. For that, you should really be contacting an independent financial advisor, and of course I'll be happy to speak to you should you wish to after this this webinar. You can contact me. Okay. So this is just a little slide here to sort of get us feeling a bit reflective. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I think, you know, I'm probably preaching to the converted, to anyone who is on this webinar, because obviously you're interested in Bedford Sustainability Week, and you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in that word, sustainability. Yeah, we do have to look after this planet. We have to make sure it's going to still be here in a good state for our children and the generations to come. So here's a little contents here of the presentation. I'm going to be telling you what ethical and sustainable investing is. I'm going to outline the 3 different main approaches to ethical and sustainable investing. I'm going to explain a little bit about how you can invest, and then touch upon, well, what's in it for you, and then at the end, the next steps that you could take on. Oh, I think someone's waiting. Should we let him in? You wait. Okay. I think he's in. On to the next slide. So what is ethical and sustainable investing? So obviously we all know what investing is. It's about placing your money into companies or into assets or into financial instruments that you hope are going to give you a good return for the future. So ethical investing is an investment strategy where the investor's ethical values are the primary objective. An investor chooses to ethically invest when they want to make a difference in society. Their primary goal from the investment is to meet their moral, social and religious values, while the returns are secondary. And I think the problem is with this sector is that for too long now, people hear the word ethical and they think they're being asked to give away their money. Now that would be philanthropy. Giving away your money to a good cause and not expecting anything back in return is philanthropy. This is not philanthropy. This is investing. You are expecting a return, but you're being a little bit choosy about where you put your money, so that you know that your return that you make on your investments is not at the expense of something else, such as, you know, children, child labour in factories, or human rights abuses in other countries, or ripping up ecosystems so that animals' natural habitat is being destroyed, or causing issues with climate change. You know, you're really thinking about where your money goes because you've actually got a bit of a conscience as to what impact you're having with your investments. So sustainability, I mean, I'm sure you all know what that is, but we'll just touch on it here. Anyway, obviously sustainability can be explained as follows. A sustainable world is one that works efficiently within natural as well as social boundaries, and one that by definition can sustain itself indefinitely. In order to achieve this, economic systems need to transition towards circular operating models designed to reduce waste, keep materials in use, and regenerate resources. Now, I just put that into my own words there at the end. It's giving back what you take out so that you don't run out. And why should we care? Well, obviously, the Earth's climate has seen many changes in its 4.5 billion years. For example, 18,000 years ago, most of Britain was covered in ice and glaciers. Although changes to the Earth's climate are natural, current changes are a result of increasing human populations and activities. And when talking about climate change in relation to human activities, climate change can be said to mean the build-up of man-made gases in the atmosphere that trap the sun's heat, causing changes in weather patterns around the world. And obviously these changes in weather patterns, we all know what that means. You know, there's forest fires in Australia, there's the melting of the ice cap here, you know, we've got destruction of the Amazon rainforests, you know, it's endless. So we need to look after our planet if it's going to be looking after us. Now, no presentation would be complete without the obligatory slide on history. So this is not a new phenomenon. Ethical investing has been around for many, many years. In the 18th century, the American Quakers restricted members from spending their time or money in the slave trade. And the Methodists also decided that they should be refraining from investing in industries that harm one's neighbour, such as chemical plants. Another example of religious-based ethical investing is in Islamic banking, which shuns investments in alcohol, gambling, pork and other forbidden items. In the 20th century, this ethical investing turned a little bit more towards social-based causes rather than religious. And it often then became very linked to politics of the time and social trends. For example, in the US in the 1960s and 1970s, ethical investors focused on companies and organisations that promoted equality and rights for workers. You might remember Miss America that was on television not long ago with Cate Blanchett. That was all very much about the female right to vote and the female agency effort there. So yeah, they became quite political. Since the 1990s though, ethical investments have begun to focus heavily on environmental issues, and ethical investors have moved away from the coal and fossil fuel companies and more towards those that are supporting clean and sustainable energy. So obviously investments are largely equities, which is essentially just a small part of a company. So companies are extremely important in terms of what they are doing. There's a lot of companies now really taking notice of the fact that their stakeholders, their employees and their customers are wanting to know what is happening in their supply chain, where the raw materials come from, how are things manufactured, are they using renewable energy or are they using the fossil fuels? Is there an end use for the product, or is it all ending up in landfill? All of these things, you know, people do care about, and it's people like Greta Thunberg, Al Gore, David Attenborough, Elon Musk, Prince Philip. All of these people, you know, have been raising the profile of all sorts of ethical and sustainable issues around what companies have been up to. Here, Larry Fink from BlackRock has put it very nicely what corporate purpose should be about. So purpose is not a mere tagline or marketing campaign. It is a company's fundamental reason for being, what it does every day to create value for its stakeholders. And by value, of course, we are not talking about profits. We are talking about how a company can actually make the world a better place and bring value in that way, not just deliver a dividend to an investor. So I'm going to focus on the three main different approaches of ethical and sustainable investing. So there's a continuum really. I mean, over here to the left of responsible, we would have conventional investing, which is literally, yeah, put me in a portfolio of investments that are going to make me a really good return and not care at all what it's invested in, what damage those companies could be doing to the world. That's the conventional investing, that's over here. But then beyond that, we've got responsible investing, which is still, oh, put me in everything that will make me some money. Oh, but yeah, if, you know, let's put it into something that they've done a bit of an assessment on what their environmental, social and governance risks are, and let's just make sure that they're mitigating some of those. So that's responsible investment. ESG is environmental, social and governance investing, and that's one that I'm going to be talking about in a bit more detail in a minute. And also sustainability, again I'll be going into more detail on that, and impact. Again, these are the three: ESG, sustainability and impact, which I shall be focusing on in this presentation. The other end, of course, of this spectrum is philanthropy, and I've already said we are not talking about philanthropy. As noble a thing as that is, there are very few of us who can afford to just give away our pension funds. We do have to look after ourselves and our own futures. So here we go. So just a little bit more on these three main approaches that I said I was going to talk about. So ESG, ethical or environmental as it's sometimes called, social and governance investing is all about negative screening. So this is where a fund manager will decide that they want to screen out all of the sectors that are not particularly fashionable because of the damage that they're doing. So that's where people are saying, well, I don't want my money to be invested in arms or tobacco or animal testing, gambling, adult entertainment, anything that is really having a very unhealthy or damaging impact on the world in terms of its social areas or on the environment. Now, sustainable investing is more of a positive selection. You're not just screening out the bad stuff. You're actually looking, you're screening out the bad stuff anyway as a matter of course, but you're going beyond that and you're looking to invest in companies who are having a 360 degree of the world, making sure that everything that they do, be it in their employment practices, in their treatment of their end products, in their manufacturing processes, everything that they do, they're making sure that they're doing the right thing. In essence, sustainable companies are just some of the best run companies in the world. They're not doing anything particular to solve the world's problems, but for example, we might take someone like Starbucks coffee. So we know Starbucks coffee are buying their coffee free trade. We know that they are trying very hard not to encourage single use of their cups. They're encouraging people to use their own. They're using recycled materials in their cups, and they're making sure that they can recycle again and again and again. They're also employing people the minimum wage or the living wage. They're doing things ethically, but their end product or their service is not actually honing in on a particular issue. Now, impact investing is where they're actively investing in businesses whose core product or service are delivering or seeking to deliver solutions to environmental and social challenges across the globe. So again, just a little bit more on these slides here about what those three areas are doing. So ESG, negative screening, taking out the bad stuff. So typically you might have a portfolio of funds where it's a conventional fund and there's been no screening at all. So that would be for the people who are on the left-hand side, don't really have any concerns at all about being ethical or sustainable. And then the fund managers or the big investment houses of the world will realise that there are some people with a bit of a conscience. They'll want exactly the same kind of portfolio, but they don't want the bad stuff. So they'll screen out the bad stuff. And they'll perhaps put ESG in the title of the fund just to identify that that is a fund that has been negatively screened. So the features of ESG, there's over 800 such funds. Like I say, they are often like a conventional fund, such as Asia Pacific, for example, and then it's adapted, and it then might be called Asia Pacific Sustainable Fund or ESG Fund. Now, the cost of these funds are a lot cheaper than the other types of funds because you are just taking out the bad stuff. The research involved is not as great as what you'll see with the sustainable and the impact funds. Yeah. Now, the advantages of the ESG funds is that they're commonly available within your workplace pension funds or your normal defined contribution pension fund. If you go onto your provider's website, such as Scottish Widows or Prudential or Royal London, any of these big name providers, you'll be able to find a list of funds that will cater towards this kind of appetite for ESG. And it's not normally that much more expensive than the conventional type of funds. The disadvantage of ESG is, again, it's not doing anything particularly amazing, it's just not doing anything bad. And often it won't be 100% of that fund that is ESG screened. It might only be 10% or 20% or whatever it is that the fund manager has been able to achieve within the theme that they're trying to stick to for that particular fund. So sustainable investing goes a step further from ESG. They are positively selecting some of the best companies in the world. Like I say, they're ones that are really making sure that in everything they do, they're behaving ethically and paying the minimum wage, making sure they've got diversity on their boards, making sure their carbon footprint's low, and they're minimising or completely negating their environmental impact. There's a lot of funds in this space. This does seem to be a really popular area. On that continuum, from responsible to philanthropy, you'll find that people tend to be one end or the other and not so much in the middle. So we're getting up more towards the actively really wanting some decent investment here in some really good companies. Because of the extra due diligence that would need to be done for these to find these kind of companies, to make sure you're not just cutting out the bad stuff, the arms, the gambling, the alcohol, the tobacco. You are actually having to look in a quite granular detail at how companies operate, how their boards operate, what governance they have in place, their employment practices. Just so much detail is going into the research here. So this is a more expensive type of fund normally. And anyone who knows much about the way fund managers work, there's generally two ways. There's a passive approach to fund management and there's an active approach. A passive approach is where you will just buy all of an index or all of a part of the market and not select particular stocks. An active approach is where you are going in and you are actively saying, I don't want that one, but I'll have that one. And that means it's a lot more hands-on, a lot more labour intensive, and there's another reason for being a little bit more expensive than just ESG, which is just negative screening. But again, these types of funds are commonly available within your ISAs and your pensions, robo-advisors, and of course financial advisors can help you. The disadvantage again is that within these funds, you're not making any bespoke selection of shares here. We're not catering for individual value systems. It's all very generic. But you should be able to find a generic fund that sort of fits, unless you're an extremely picky investor. I'll come on to that in a minute. So for the picky investors, the pickier investors, this is impact investing, and I am simply just going to do this. This is the pièce de la résistance of ethical and sustainable investing. This is impact investing. So here we are choosing companies who are deliberately and intentionally trying to fix the problems of the world. And I'll come on to those problems in a minute by looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But really, we're looking at companies such as in the renewables sector, where they are trying to solve the problem of climate change. They are saying, look, we need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel, which is causing too much damage to our climate, and we can do that by replacing that reliance with wind technology, solar, reliance on methane gas, anaerobic digestion, hydrogen, fuel cells, lots of other different types of energy sources. And there are other companies as well who are having an impact in different areas, such as trying to relieve poverty in the world, perhaps trying to rid the world of pandemics, obviously a subject that we're all very familiar with at the moment. So obviously pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies, will come into the area of impact investing. Now, there aren't quite so many funds in this space. It's quite a new area, because you're selecting particular types of companies in particular areas, doing particular things in a particular way. The investing universe is not as large as maybe for the sustainable type funds. And the fund managers in this space tend to be working for boutique firms, where they've got really, really well-skilled, very, very clever people doing a lot of due diligence and research. Also, some of the big investment houses as well are doing a lot in this area. So the cost is higher, but I think that you can agree that... Oh, I've got a bit of feedback. Somebody's just switched there. Thank you. Yeah, so the cost in this area is higher because of the level of research that goes into it. But I think you can agree that with ESG, you can say, oh, great, I'm not investing in anything bad. With sustainable, you can say, oh, great, I'm not investing in anything bad, and I'm investing in companies that are really being ethical, doing the right thing, the best run companies of the world. Impact investing, you can say both of those things, but you can also say, look, I've been investing in Moderna, which has just helped create a vaccine to rid the world of the coronavirus, or I've been investing in a power company who is now reducing its reliance on fossil fuels and is now doing a lot more with wind and solar and other renewable type energies. So here it is very much an active selection of stocks. Again, that adds to the cost of it. But I think that you can be really pleased that you are doing the right thing by investing in impact stocks. Again, it's not possible to exclude large parts of a portfolio. If you had a particular inclination not to invest in animal testing, I'm afraid impact investing wouldn't allow you to get to that point, because it's very keen to be investing in the pharmaceutical and biomedical technology area. So if you had any needs to completely avoid animal testing, you would have to go to what is known as a discretionary fund manager, which again is more expensive. You should all be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, hopefully. I'm just going to now attempt playing a video which will hopefully help explain to you a little bit about what these development goals are. Hopefully I'm going to do this right, so I'm going to do a new share. I don't know if that's worked.
Yeah, it's on there.
Yeah. Okay, let's go play this.
Don't think we're getting anything on the screen.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were watching it. Can you? I might have to skip this. I'll try one more time. Okay, resume share. Let's try. What are you seeing now?
The screen. You're back on the presentation.
Oh, tell you what, let's skip that. I'll just tell you what it was about then. It was a very nice video that showed you a little bit around all of these sustainable development goals. I shall just briefly go through and explain them then. So with impact investing, the fund managers working in this space are using the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to find the kind of companies that are doing things to help in all of these areas. So I'll just read them because it's probably quite small. So we've got no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for the goals. I do urge you to maybe Google the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's a really nice clip on YouTube that you might like to watch that unfortunately we haven't been able to play, but never mind. But these are all of the areas where we can measure companies and what they're doing in each of these areas to make the world a better place, to sort of deliver a solution in these areas. And obviously, not every company is going to be delivering a solution in every one of those goals. But for example, I picked out a few here and to just give you an example of how companies can be doing things to help these areas. So obviously, no poverty and decent work and economic growth. Obviously, companies are employing people. So it's their responsibility to make sure their employees are not living in poverty, and they can do that by paying them a decent salary that's going to cover their living costs. And also, it's not just about them employing people at a decent salary, but also making sure that the supply chain that they're using are also doing everything in a very ethical way and paying their people correctly, not making use of slave labour or child labour or anything like that. Now, this is probably the more obvious one. So, responsible consumption and production. Obviously, any production manufacturing company is going to be having to look closely at what kind of raw materials it's using and whether or not they're using them sustainably and replenishing the natural resources. Perhaps they're relying on renewable power for the production and operations, so they're not polluting local communities or ecosystems. And then the end product, the last thing you want is for your plastics to be finding their way to the landfill sites or just polluting beautiful natural woodlands. Or, for example, you don't certainly want them to be reaching the seas and affecting marine life. I think we've all seen those awful photos of turtles and other marine life being wrapped up in plastics. Okay, so so those are the Sustainable Development Goals that we can use to measure just how impactful some of the companies are being. So how do you invest? Well, assuming that you've all got a pension, maybe some of you are still saving for your retirement, maybe some of you are already taking your retirement. And if you're taking your retirement benefits and you've got a defined benefit scheme, so you're not involved in any investment choices, I'm afraid that means that you can't make any particular choices as to how that money is invested. But if you have what's known as a defined contribution plan, and it's still invested, then you can absolutely go and find out how your pension is invested. Or if you've got an ISA, again, look carefully, what fund are you in? Often you'll be in a fund of funds, so it's a portfolio of a number of funds, and with each fund there is another portfolio. So you have to dig deep sometimes to find out what the exact fund is, the exact company is that you're invested in. And it's a really difficult thing to do, to decide which funds to be invested in. And that's why a lot of people do use financial advisors, or you can rely on the labels that are given by your pension company. So if it does say ESG on it, then you will know that hopefully the bad stuff has been screened out. If it says sustainable, maybe that means hopefully that it's gone a step further and they're investing in some really, really good quality companies who are doing some very ethical things. So yeah, I've just said here that there are over 20,000 investment funds to choose from, and you've got 1,500 have an ethical, sustainable, social, environmental, or thematic approach. So there is a lot of work to be done on your part, or of course, work with a financial advisor who will be able to help you. If you are going to do it yourself, you need to drill down and look at every single company you're invested in, and then you need to employ this kind of analysis here. You've got to think about what the company's product is or service, and the journey of that product or service. What natural resources are they using? How are they manufacturing? Are they polluting the environment? Is there a lot of transportation involved? How long is the product or service used for? Is it just thrown away, or is there an end use that can help towards sustainability? So here I've just listed out the investment funds. These are the 3 key ways that you can invest: through investment funds, like I've said, which means that you can go to your pension provider and just look at the individual fund choices and select one that is going to be right for you. And within that, by doing it that way, you will find a number of ESG and sustainable funds And like I said, they're reasonably low cost. You won't get an awful lot of information on exactly what impact you're having. If you want that, then I suggest you move more towards impact investing, and that is done generally through model portfolios, where these boutique investment houses will decide exactly where you should be investing your money, and then you can invest in a model portfolio through what is known as a platform. That is getting a little bit technical, and if you're looking at impact investing, you really should be working with a financial advisor. Whereas the ESG and the sustainable ones, you can get through choices made through your own providers. I did mention earlier, if you're really picky, you're wanting to avoid certain sectors, and such as animal testing. Let me just tell you that in animal testing, with all of these approaches for investing, you don't get companies where they're testing cosmetics on animals. It is only going to be in the pharmaceutical sector, where it is about saving lives, basically. So rest assured, the latest face cream is not going to be tested on animals. But if you did feel very strongly that you didn't even want exposure to animal testing for pharmaceuticals, this is where you'd be going for this discretionary fund manager approach. You can build your own portfolio, which is entirely bespoke to your own values and preferences. But it does require you to engage with the fund manager in quite a strong way. And because of the costs involved, it is really suited to portfolios of over $250,000. And there's not that many people who have perhaps got that in terms of whether within the sphere of their influence, that they can influence the investments. And you do really kind of need to understand in detail really about investments. Okay, so picking out some of the types of companies that a lot of these funds are investing in. I'll just quickly explain some of these. So in the energy sector, we've got Siemens Energy, which is very heavily focused on renewable energy and alternative sources to combat climate change. BMX Technologies is about nuclear power. Can be controversial, but when all is said and done, it is still not burning fossil fuels and having quite the same damaging effect on the environment. We've got Plug Power, is focused on developing technologies in the clean hydrogen and zero emission fuel cell solutions. Google is a good example of a technology stock where they are trying to be ethical, and everything that they do, they're trying to be aware of their environmental footprints, their data privacy, their advertising standards, freedom of expression, data security, employee recruitment, retention, intellectual property protection, and they're generally trying to behave in a really ethical way. Tomra Systems is a technology company that is focused on processes for recycling plastics. So that's a really hot stock that is going to be having a real impact. Infineon is a semiconductor company, and also is involved in the production of these chips that you get on credit cards and ID cards and things like that. I guess that has some links with data protection and human rights and that kind of thing. In pharma and health, you've got Moderna, which I mentioned earlier. Obviously, the producer of the COVID vaccine. Teladoc Health is a very interesting technology which is aimed at communicating with GPs. So, in big rural communities in parts of Africa, for example, if they need to get messages to GPs and communicate with them, find out what's wrong with them, they're producing some of the really good technologies there. And of course, AstraZeneca, another one that has been very active in finding vaccines against COVID-19. So I hope you agree that these are all very honourable companies doing some really amazing things. Now, obviously, there is a bandwagon here. People are jumping on it. There's a lot of companies going out there and saying, yes, I'm doing everything ethically and sustainably, and I'm taking care of my environmental footprint. But you don't always get companies doing what they're saying they're doing. And Boohoo is an example of that. So beware the wolf in sheep's clothing. Boohoo is a fashion retailer that was found. It was heavily invested in by a lot of the ESG funds, and then it turned out that actually they were employing people in sweatshops in Leicester and paying less than £3.50 an hour. That caused them to suffer £1 billion hit to their share price. So it really isn't a good idea to be saying that you're doing things that you're not doing, and then you get found out, and the repercussions on your share price is massive. Volkswagen and Audi, quite a few years ago now, were another example of that, when they said that they had really low CO2 emissions in their cars, and of course they didn't. Okay. So now we've talked about all of the types of investments and how you can do it, the costs, the advantages, etc. But I did start off the presentation by saying this is not philanthropy. You are expecting a return. So other than the return though, what's in it for you? Well, I think really, if you're talking about sustainability and you're talking about doing the right thing, I think not to have looked at what you're investing in, be that directly yourself in your ISA or through your pension company, you need to be walking the walk as well as talking the talk. I think it's a really good idea to make sure that you are aligned to your values. You're taking a stand, you're making sure that you're not effectively giving finance to companies that are not in line with your values and are not doing the right thing by the planet and the people. You're rewarding the ethical companies. So if everybody was to look into the pension fund and say, right, okay, let's all take our money away from all the companies that are doing the bad stuff, we really do have power here. Like knowing. And actually, as a financial planner, this last one.
I think we're struggling to hear you.
Oh,
Just keeps cutting in and out.
is it coming all the way through or just started?
Just started recently, yeah.
How can you hear me now? Now?
No, it's quite muffled.
You hear me, Corey?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, as a financial planner, what I'm really keen to do is to have people really engage with their finances, to not just view it as something for the future, but something that you can have real impact and really make a difference to the world now. So we have talked about the return, and obviously you are wanting a return. Now, people used to believe that you had to have a lot of money to sacrifice your return for your conscience, and that isn't the case these days. You're not necessarily going to inhibit your financial returns by investing in these ethical and sustainable stocks. In fact, what happened over the period of COVID is that the markets dropped very suddenly and were very volatile for quite some time. But what we did notice is that the sustainable companies, the ones that were really well run, did not suffer quite the volatility that the conventional stocks did. So what we have deduced from that is that the companies where the boards are actually thinking in a rounded way and thinking about not damaging the planet and doing the right thing are just mitigating their risks in so many ways that this is why the volatility is not there. The oil sector did take a bit of a hit around the same time as COVID. And so it is quite possible that the reason that some of the conventional companies suffered badly with their share price during the COVID time was actually less to do with COVID as such, but to do with the share price of the oil rather than COVID. So this is something we need to keep an eye on to see just how correlated this is, or rather uncorrelated, because sustainable ethical companies are not invested in fossil fuels and therefore will not be tracking the oil price in the same way as other companies. But this is an area that we'll just need to keep an eye on. But generally speaking, the sustainable companies are doing extremely well, and there has been no sacrifice to return over the past 12 months. In fact, there's been a premium on the return. So your next steps are really to establish what your values are. You need to know what's important to you. You need to know what you feel about tobacco, alcohol, gambling, as a very basic. Are these the areas that you want to be avoiding? If so, you need to be looking at going into ESG stocks, or perhaps, you want to take it a bit further and go into the sustainable funds. You need to look at what your current investments and pensions are already in. Because I think you'd be quite surprised if you suddenly established your values and realized that you don't like certain things, but then you went and had a look at what you're invested in. I think you might be a bit upset actually to know that some of the companies that you were inadvertently supporting. So, and if you do feel a bit like that, then what you should be doing is then trying to make some changes by talking to your pension company, going onto their website, seeing what the alternative fund choices are. Or speaking to an independent financial planner like myself who can help you make some of those decisions. So just to conclude, just want you to really realise that your money has the power to make a difference. And I've heard so many clients say, oh, I don't think what I've got in my pension is going to make a difference. You'd be surprised, and you should also be considering that if everybody, no matter how small their pot was, if everybody did that, that would add up to an awful lot. That would be an awful lot of carbon saved, I promise you. And we need to be encouraging companies to behave in a way that is ethical and sustainable. And we can make a difference. So you need to decide on what kind of difference you want to make. You need to engage with your money and your financial future, and make sure that you can hold your head up high and say, yep, I'm doing what I can. Not only am I doing my recycling and I'm wearing my clothes as long as possible, mending them, whatever, I'm buying my seasonal vegetables. You can do all of that. But if you're investing in companies that are not doing the right thing, you're negating all of that good work and some. So I've just listed here a few things that you might want to do some searches on. So Principles for Responsible Investment, UN Sustainable Development Goals, the World Resources Institute, COP21. I'm sure you're aware there's a big gathering in Glasgow later this year. That's something to keep an eye on. And the UK Sustainable Investment Foundation as well is doing some great work in this area, and it might be of interest to you to look at that. Here are my contact details. If you wanted to discuss anything in the presentation or ask any questions, I'd be very happy to help. And I'll take some questions if anyone's got any questions.
So we have had a few questions in the chat. Dan asks, besides acting as small retail investors with our own savings, how can we push our employers' pension funds and local authority investments, etc., to shift entirely to sustainable holdings as a matter of corporate policy?
Well, I'm sure that you can, and I'm sure you probably need to locate the correct person within your organisation who is involved in that. Actually, a lot of the time, depending on how your work pension scheme is set up, there's often some employee representatives that sit on the boards of your workplace pension plans. So if that's the case, I would be speaking to them and finding out whether or not you can have a say in how that's done. If you are with a firm who's using a pension company such as Aviva or Scottish Widows or something, and they have put you in a default fund, then you need to be asking them, well, you know, I don't want to be in this default fund. It hasn't got ethical, sustainable investments in it. What's the solution for people who are interested in sustainable, ethical investments? And they ought to be able to tell you. I think the local authorities are already pretty good at this stuff, so I would be surprised if they are not already doing a lot in this space. But I think it's just asking the right people within your organisation. And I think this will become mainstream in a couple of years. You know, you won't need me banging on about it on a presentation. It will just hopefully just be done as a matter of course.
Another one from Dan is, how can we be confident that ethical investments aren't in corporate greenwash? The individual holdings making up impact funds seem to include a lot of quite generic tech stocks or waste management, and I wonder if something like Covanta couldn't pass screening, or at the level of fund management, can we be confident investing in, for example, a BlackRock managed ethical fund when BlackRock are simultaneously the major financier of new fossil exploration and arms sales?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because certainly you mentioned the technology stocks there, and a lot of these investment houses have very differing views. And this is what I mean when I say that there's a lot of due diligence involved, because if you are that discerning and you are really wanting to hone in on particular things, you're going to have to work with somebody to ask all of the right questions. And I mean, I know some impact portfolios where they don't have any technology stocks and very against it, and some that really do plow into it, thinking that actually they're leading the way in terms of being ethical. I mean, as it comes to Covanta, that's something that, yeah, not all, well, fund managers will be aware of it and they'll have a view on it, but it's a bit like animal testing in a way. I mean, some people will believe that animal testing is an absolute no-no, and that's their views and that's their values, but because of the views of the fund managers of, you know, how being important in solving health issues, they'll still be investing in those companies. So Covanta, I mean, they are doing some bad stuff, but they're also doing some good stuff to negate against that, I believe. Most energy companies these days are not black and white. They're doing the fossil fuels, but to somehow negate, they're doing a bit of the renewables as well. If you're very, very picky, the only way to do it is through a discretionary fund management, really.
Does anyone have any more questions? Do feel free to unmute yourself.
I'd like to say thanks very much, Emily. That was really informative. I don't particularly have a question at the moment, but I would like to be in touch with you.
Oh, brilliant. Well, feel free. I could talk about this all day. Does anyone have any other questions or any comments? I would just end by saying that given the choice of a portfolio of investments that is achieving a good return, but doing some great stuff and not doing some bad stuff, versus a portfolio of investments that is giving an equally good return, perhaps even maybe a bit more volatile, but perhaps doing bad stuff. You know, I find it difficult to understand why somebody wouldn't always choose the one that's doing the good stuff. That's how I feel. And I also feel that once you see that performance chart of your investments, if in a bad year for ethical sustainable investments, you saw that you were a little bit under, that margin between the conventional bad stuff and your ethical sustainable, that margin, you've got to look at it and go, yeah, okay, I didn't get that, but that doesn't matter to me because my objective was to be investing in ethical sustainable companies, and I don't want a return, that little bit of extra return that's going to be the expense of our planet and of our people. So yeah.
Emily, can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I was trying to formulate it in my head, so it took a little while. Are there green portfolio managers? So in other words, are there better ones than others at selecting the ethical investments?
There definitely are, and as somebody mentioned greenwashing before, obviously people are jumping on that bandwagon, and some people are paying lip service to this and not really doing their homework. I mean, as a financial advisor, I do a lot of due diligence in this area, so I have to work out exactly which investment houses are the ones that are winning the awards for being really thorough. Perhaps they've got all the badges. Have you heard of a B Corporation? That's a really high standard of ethical company. And a lot of these fund management houses doing the impact stuff are B Corporations. I mean, it's impossible for us to know that there's never going to be some skeleton that comes out of a closet somewhere, but in making sure that we are, you know, really doing our due diligence on the underlying companies and on the fund managers, we hopefully are working with the good guys and not the cowboys. Sorry, I don't know if that really answered your question, but there's a spectrum.
Well, I can see by your passion exactly where you are. Bless you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emily, for joining Sustainability Week. Let me just share something. Just very quickly. So tomorrow there will be another event. Will be on a disposable society, protecting our natural environment. You can book onto this today. It closes at 11:59 p.m. tonight. You might also be interested in some other talks we have planned for this week. Reducing food waste, climate crisis, meat, dairy and climate change, and home composting, and also another one on food waste. 2 ways to book. You can head to Eventbrite and search for Sustainable Bedford. You can head to the Sustainable Bedford Facebook, Instagram or Twitter pages. Instagram will have a link in our bio which shows all of the events. If you have any questions about anything, please do email me, sustainablebedford@gmail.com. I hope to see you again at another event soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Corey, can I just ask a question, please, of you?
Yeah, of course you can.
To book another session, I'm not really familiar with Eventbrite. You say there's a closing date or a closing time. How far in advance of that particular session do we need to book?
So the sessions will always close the day before at that time. So that all that does is allow bookings to be like looked at, etc. So Yeah,
24 hours then?
roughly, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks.
Brilliant.
Oh.
Thanks very much to everybody.
Thank you very much.